Welcome to a new episode of A Call to Grow. Every time I think of who I would like to invite for a conversation about life, changes, and leadership, I ask myself who have been the best teachers for me to learn from. Have it been the most professionally successful leader? Has it been the most knowledgeable people around me? Are they the self declared gurus? Or are they people who've had the courage of sharing about themselves to me, who've had the strength to be vulnerable, to own up their struggles and insecurities, their fears and their dilemmas, with as much grace as they would wear their achievements, their convictions, and their stances. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Mr. Zaffar Khan, who's a person who brings in story about his identities as an Indian born Afghan, currently living in Oman, someone who has followed his passions in life without being goal directed. So, welcome to the podcast A Call to Grow, Zaffar. Very grateful for you to have agreed to participate and be interviewed. And really nice to see you after a very long time. But I know you for so many years, over so many years. But for the audience, if I were to ask you, who is Zaffar Khan, what would you say?
Thank you very much for inviting me. If I had to explain to the viewers who Zaffar Khan is, I would probably identify myself as an Indian Afghan, to be very precise. I grew up in Calcutta, was born in Bukharo in Bihar, which is now in Chhattisgarh, I think. I'm a passionate rugby player. I live now in Oman. I worked with different careers, from fitness to corporate employee engagement, which I do now. I have a small little family now in Oman, a little boy and my wife. We live here. Yeah, that's it. That's a very small description of my life.
So, you're an Indian Afghan. What does that mean? I mean, who's an Indian Afghan?
An Indian Afghan is somebody who's a first generation Afghan. So I was born in India. I have in my family I have my siblings who are not a first generation Afghan. So I have two brothers and one sister, and two of my siblings were born in Afghanistan, and me and my brother were born in India. So we are the first generation to be born here. And I call myself, that's why, an Indian Afghan. If you go ask my brother, he would call himself an Afghan who's an Indian now.
So, what part of Zaffar is Afghan and what part of Zaffar is Indian?
As soon as I step out of the door, I am Indian. As soon as I'm inside the door, what I would say in my mother's territory, I am Afghan.
So give us a sense and feel of who Zaffar is inside the door in his mother's territory, and who is Zaffar once he steps out of the door.
My mother gets really annoyed if I speak in any other language apart from Pashto, which is my mother tongue. And I'm very grateful that she's always pushed us to learn the language, and my father, because I can then pass it on to my son. And this is a big part of my culture, the way we eat, or which is we've introduced a lot of masala now into the food, but our food was very bland. If you go to an Afghan house, which would be Afghanistan. Yeah, I think a lot of it is what I carry, my parents' value system, which are a lot in the house. Though they know that I also have a life outside the house. So these are the kind of things I would say an Indian Afghan Zaffar and an Afghan Zaffar in the house. Kind of, how do you say, balanced life.
Is there an Indian identity that you experience even within the house? And is there an Afghan identity that you carry with you even once you step outside the door?
Yes, that's a very interesting question because when we were growing up, we were the first children in the house who were Indian Afghan.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say we were the first children, there was nobody who was below our age group. So we were carrying a lot of the identity in the house. But now, when I look at children from my brothers,
Mm-hmm.
who are my niece and nephews, they have a very strong identity of Afghan,
Mm-hmm.
the kind I did not have.
Give us
And
an example, for instance.
they are much more closer to the Afghan music. They're much more closer to Afghan language. They want to learn about the history. If I look back and try to understand when I was 15 or 14, did I have that drive to learn about the Afghan history and culture? I don't think I did have the drive. I was more driven towards becoming an Indian.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you ask me, it's a very fascinating shift why this generation wants to be more Afghan than an Indian. I think it's a kind of an identity which everybody chooses or sometimes gets thrown at them and they have to use it. Coming back to your second question, which I remember, what is the identity I take out when I'm one of the identity which I carry with me? I think it's a sense of pride which I carry as an Afghan. I was always running away from it, but
Mm-hmm.
I think now I have accepted it, and I think one of the biggest reason I've accepted it is because I will have to teach that to my son,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't see how a father would share a certain kind of value system if the
Mm-hmm.
father is running away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something which I find that I have to take it up, but I think over the period of time I'm more comfortable with it,
Mm-hmm.
and I am okay with accepting that I am also an Afghan.
That's interesting. I think if I've understood you correctly, you're saying that when you were a child and an adolescent, I mean, in some ways, you experienced your Afghan identity inside the house mostly by speaking in Pashto language, and that being the rule in your house, which your mother would insist,
Yeah,
right?
that was a
But you don't remember or recall having a very strong pull towards discovering or exploring your history or Afghan culture or music per se actively. Uh, Whereas today, you're saying that children, your brother's children, for example, are far more actively engaged in trying to identify and connect with Afghan culture, music, literature, history, etc., etc. They're far more curious than you ever were. And that links to what you said then, that when you once you stepped out of the house, today you're far more you hold a certain distinctiveness and certain pride about being Afghan or of Afghan origin. But you mentioned in passing, and I just would like to clarify that with you. You said that you ran away from it for a while. Okay,
yeah.
can you tell us a little more about why did you run away? Or at one point of time, what made you want to disown your Afghan identity once you were outside the house?
I think now it strikes again a very good memory, and not a very great memory. Um, I think my first identity of I would speak the language in Pashto. I would eat shorwa. I would do atan, which is the traditional dance. But there was nobody clarified to me what being an Afghan is.
Mm-hmm.
I think my biggest understanding of when I became an Afghan was when we started watching the movie Rambo.
Mm-hmm.
And I always remember what he said in one of the lines, which was one of the scene where he says, "Always be aware of the vengeance of an Afghan."
Mm-hmm.
And the other part I don't remember, but this kind of stuck with me because it was like a pride thing for me, and I was like, okay, I will. That's a good identity to stick to. The vengeance of an Afghan. I was 14 years or 15 years old at that point of time. The 9/11 thing, the September 9/11 American attack was something which kind of pushed me away from the identity. Still kept me very close to it, but I didn't want to be associated with it because it was something we were involved with as an Afghan community, country, and nobody wanted to be associated with it, at least for the reasons which it happened. So I think that those were the two biggest things which kind of were like drawn and then taken away in a very strong way.
If I were to ask you what were the three most defining change moments in your life, what would they be?
I think some of the most important things I learned as a young man was to sacrifice, was to commit to something and then stick to it. I think what changed me or built me, I wouldn't say change, what built me as the person I am was the sport I played. And it'll be very, very unfair if I say something else. That is one of the biggest thing. I think the sport changed me. I don't know if any other sport would do that to me. Of course, every sport has its own value system, and every sport, in many ways, like all religion, are teaching the same path to peace. And I think every sport brings in some sort of good things. I think the second element would be living in India. I think coming from a migrant family who I've seen my parents struggle initially when they are very vivid memories of it, but I've memories of how my parents struggle. I think that resilience of my father and my mother to help us grow as individual is something which really inspired me in many ways, not if every day, but in many ways, in many instances to grow. And I think the third one would be is something which I am going through now. It's a massive change for me. It's something which I had never expected I would do because I come from a community environment where it's not looked up to. I work not that much, but I am also stay-at-home dad. Is that what you call it?
Yeah.
And as I said to you in the beginning of our conversation, is that there are phases in life you realize what your identity is, and this phase has a complete different floodgate. It has opened up something which we took things so much for granted. Just the fact that how difficult is it to take care of a small human who's completely at your mercy. The first part, and then the whole idea that how women are looked at when they take care of a home. And many points I could put forward, and it wouldn't be less. I'm writing a small journal actually on things I'm struggling with, and I'm looking at it from my point of view as a man, because I am looking at the stereotypical comments the past Zaffar is making at this Zaffar, saying that, oh, what are you doing? Where's the salary? There's no salary coming in. But I'm also looking at it from my mother's point of view, who was a migrant, not at all educated, no financial freedom, and how she would struggle with something like this. And mashallah, I have a very easy life here in compared to a lot of women or men who are doing it by themselves. So these are the three things which have kind of differently shaped me and would shape me on further going ahead.
So, I think that's so interesting, Zafar, and I'm in touch with the fact that there is, while I say that I've known you for a long time, there is only I've known you in a certain phase of your life, and there is a what really happened when you met rugby, and how did that happen? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, I will tell you the story how it happened. I used to play cricket, and a lot of people, if they are from Calcutta, would know I used to play for a club. It's still there. It's called Bonvita Club,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it was run by this ex-cricketer Arun Lal.
Mm-hmm.
And
Is that something that was encouraged by your family, supported by your
yeah,
family?
I'm coming to that.
Right.
It's and it's very interesting why it was
Mm-hmm.
encouraged. I think at that point of time, I don't remember. Um, I must have been around 15,
Mm-hmm.
14, 15, like that. And I think the Afghan national team started to do well
Mm-hmm.
in
In
on the
cricket.
in cricket on the world stage.
Okay.
They weren't winning like
Okay.
international matches, but um, and Facebook and Instagram wasn't there. Facebook was there, but it wasn't that much being used. But it started to get small little headlines in TV channels
Mm-hmm.
and my father so that was one part of it. Then there is an Afghan Mela, which is like a
Mm-hmm.
gathering happens every Eid
Mm-hmm.
in the Maidan, which is once a year, and it's for 3 days, and people come and dance and play Afghan sports and stuff like that. There's also a group of boys who play cricket, and I used to play cricket with them, and I would bowl and bat quite well with them. So um, in the Afghan community in Calcutta, there was a bit of name for a few weeks that during that point of time, or that Zafer Khan's son plays very well cricket.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of subsequently went to my father, that news that he's playing well. And the Afghan team doing well. So he was like, I'm sure he must have thought, oh, it's not a bad thing. He's not doing well in education. He's got no interest studying. Why don't I keep him busy with his studies, but also see if I push him towards, see if he would like this. Um, and that's how I started to play cricket. But then, through some injuries and stuff, I couldn't carry on playing cricket, and I had a really bad back injury, and I just had to stop. And I think at that point of time, I've been a year after I struggled with it. I was just passing by Maidan near the ranges. It's a ground in Calcutta, and there was a bunch of people who was playing with this very odd-shaped, egg-shaped ball.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, and I think I watched once, and then I went back and then came back again and found them again playing there. A group of foreigners who were playing this
Mm-hmm.
game. And then that's where I met Paul Walsh, who started the club, Jungle Crows. And then he invited me and a friend of mine to come and try the sport. And that's it. I think I just started to really enjoy the game. I think it's something which, and if I think of it now, I think it is something which matched my skill level.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't very. You don't need too much skills to play
Mm-hmm.
the sport.
I wonder what other rugby players would have to say about that.
But yeah, I think it's generally it's quite an easy game. And over the time you learn how to take care of your body, and you become a bit stronger, so it's more easier. But yeah, it's not a difficult game at all. It's much easier than cricket. Definitely much easier than football. I always thought I had two left feet. That's how I started to play the game.
But when you say that rugby was such a life-changing, defining experience, and you mentioned that building you as a man, as somebody who, when you make a commitment and you stick by it, and infusing that sort of character in you, and how rugby was very defining in that. I'm assuming that there would have been certain defining moments that you may have wanted to give it up, that you didn't want to do it, or felt very ambivalent towards it, or tell us more. I mean, how did this value really seep into you?
I think because it was it's a sport which is not very well known
Mm-hmm.
in India. It's a sport which does not bring you financial stability,
Mm-hmm.
and I played it for 15 years now,
Mm-hmm.
and I know with the current standard for the next 15 years also it won't bring you that stability.
Mm-hmm.
Till we find something like we win some sort of major rugby cup. One of the biggest thing which I would always face from my community and people in it, or sometime at that point of time, not now, but at that point of time with my family, was the idea of that you're doing something which is worthless. It doesn't make any sense. It's not going to give you anything in the future, and everything became about what can you get out of the sport in terms to make you financially better.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was a completely opposite. It satisfied me as a young man. It
Mm-hmm.
took a lot of my um, inhibition, a lot of my anger, a lot of my free time away from me. So it kind of gave me those things. It put in me a lot of discipline.
Mm-hmm.
My brother now, after 16, 17, 18 years of playing, or 14 years of playing the sport, tells me that sometime last year told me that I remember um, all those 5 a.m. Alarm clocks,
Mm-hmm.
and it would make us angry, but for us it was something which we never understood.
That kind of commitment to something
Yeah.
that doesn't bring you wealth, doesn't bring you security, doesn't make sense at one level, but you just do it for passion. That was something very alien to them.
Yeah, but also you don't know yourself. You
Mm-hmm.
you you're like, sometimes you question yourself. You're like, but why am I doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Oh, sorry. For me, it was, I really loved it. And so him telling me that we now understood why you would go at 5 a.m. in the morning. I would watch you from the window going, and I would tell my wife. She said that what he's mad who goes in every day at 5 o'clock in the morning for no reason to a sport which will bring him nothing. And I understand from now from a parent's point of view that
Mm-hmm.
he wanted, or they wanted better for me. So, and they could not see what I was seeing. Um, so yeah, it's very important um, if you if you want to get something,
Mm-hmm.
you have to really push yourself to get
But did
it.
you, at that point of time, did you really see anything? Did you know that where rugby was going to take you, or what you were working towards?
No, no. That's the other thing I was going to say, is that when you don't see what you're going to get, you have to double push. If I'm playing cricket, for example, I know I might not get to the Indian team, but I will get to a state level, or somebody might pay me some money. But when you don't see anything, you're just playing for just purely because you enjoy it. At certain point of time, you question yourself: is what am I going to do? But I do believe a lot that um, life the planet comes together to make things happen for you. I tell my wife sometime, I think we would have never met. I would have never gone to Europe to study. I would have never done a lot of things now if I had not broken my knee playing rugby.
Mhm.
Because I can see a 37-year-old Zaffar still playing rugby in Calcutta if my knee was okay. It's
Mhm.
because of the knee I went away to the UK, and then things started to bring in more, and that's the explanation I give myself. But I guess this is also one thing which I drive from the sport, that okay, there was one stage which got over, and then there was a second stage.
So you just mentioned it in passing, and I'm just clarifying this. What I understand is you were playing rugby, you continued to play rugby for a long period of time, and then at some point of time you had an injury, and that stopped you from playing rugby.
Yeah, for a year, for a good year,
Which year was it?
I think 2009, 10.
And how old were you then?
If you know me, Roop, well, I know you shouldn't be asking me about numbers, but
Well, it's
but
2021, and you said you're close to 40, so this is probably your late 20s or something.
yes, thank you very much.
Okay. So and so that meant your breaking your leg meant that you couldn't play rugby anymore. But then
Yeah.
how do you link that to going to study in Europe?
Um, I always wanted to study sports,
Hmm.
and at that point of time I was also studying in IISWBM in
Hmm.
Calcutta, sports
Hmm.
management.
Hmm.
And I took it was a year, at that point of time, it was a year's program, one
Hmm.
year's program. It was a diploma, I think. And I was studying and playing. I wasn't injured then.
Hmm.
And then half through the course, I got injured. I realized that the studies I am doing is nothing which is exciting me.
Hmm.
It's the same bookish thing which I was doing when I was in school.
Hmm.
And I realized that it's a great opportunity now for me, and I have no excuse to back away from it, to accept something which again was a challenge. It was something where I had never done anything. I had never lived away from my family for probably a longer period of time. Nobody in my family had gone away to study abroad.
Hmm.
I was the person in the family who was the least expected to do any sort of formal education,
Hmm.
leave alone a master's.
Hmm.
Um, and these are all the thoughts which I can collect now, because I
Hmm.
am a grown person now. I can reflect back on what has happened. But at that point of time, I did not reflect it in this way. But I was more like, okay, these are the options for me. Um, and then a few people helped, saying that, oh, we would help you in terms of making your application and helping you out with universities. Let's try it. And I said, well, if people are trying to help me, and I'm still quite an open person, if in terms of uh, if somebody wants to help me or provide ideas and stuff. So, and then the university opportunity came. I studied
Which
sports development.
university was this?
I studied sports development and management from the University of Cardiff.
Okay.
Uh, it was originally called UWIC,
Hmm.
but then it collaborated, I think, a few years back with the main primary university. And it was an interesting experience also in the UK, in Wales.
Hmm.
Wales is like, if I had to define Wales, Wales is wet, always wet, wet and cold, always wet and cold. Yeah, interesting.
Ah. If I were to talk about the second experience that you talked about was growing up in Calcutta. Now, this is not one single event, one specific incident per se, but you say that it actually triggered in shaping in terms of who you are. Uh, what can you tell us a little more? What about living in Calcutta was so defining for you?
Whew. Yeah, I think it's not something which I could squeeze down in an hour's interview, and I don't know where to start from, to be honest, and what is at the back of your head you're looking for. And I can only think of moments where, when
All
you
right.
ask that,
Tell
like,
tell us moments.
but the first moment which comes to me, to my head, is my school in Calcutta,
Right.
and how I met some of my friends there.
Right.
Um, and the friendship I made was something which kind of opened up another gate for me to look into other people's life
Right.
and my life back at home.
Right.
Um,
Was that very distinctive?
what do you
As
mean?
in, was your life back home and their lives, were they very different?
In many ways, yes, and in many ways, no.
Say more.
Also, they had a certain expectation from their family members to be a certain way and certain things to achieve in life, and I had the same.
Hmm.
From my family, they had the same idea of that the identity needs to be from my best friend who came from UP,
Hmm.
the same in the house, and you can be anything outside.
Mm.
And I guess it's with a lot of us,
Hmm.
it's the same identity. The parents trying to enforce or
Mm.
their identity on the child,
Mm.
which
Mm.
I don't know if it's fair. I would have to see when Noah grows up if I'm enforcing too much. Um, but I think for me, one of the moments for where I come from, Khidirpur, Calcutta 23,
Mm.
um, was, I think I must have been around 17,
Mhm.
and I went to this conference in Taj Bengal,
Mhm.
and I went basically for the food
Mm.
because
Who was organizing the conference and what was it about?
I think there's some. You remember, I'm always scared of women who wear big bindis, and
Mm.
I don't know if I've told you a long time
And
back.
saris.
And saris, but particular saris, the uh, kata, no, not kata.
Katha, the cross stitch. I mean, this is a
Yeah,
kind of a stitch, yeah,
yeah,
a
yeah.
very traditional
Saris.
Bengali stitch, yeah,
Yes. But with like really dark.
with the eyes.
Yeah. Um, and it was, I think it was, I don't remember, to be honest, who organized. I was very concerned about what I was going to eat. And I remember I took a plate of food and then
Mhm.
came back, sat down. I wasn't listening to anything. And then they started talking about names which I have been to, places where I've been to, like Madhya Pradesh,
Mm.
uh, but predominantly Muslim,
Mm.
and still they didn't get my attention much. And
Mm.
then it said, "Oh, Kidipur," and I was like, "Okay." I actually remember what I was eating. It was some sort of potato thing, and she said, and then at the end of it, she was like, "They are all in the list of slums."
Mm.
Oh, interesting. I live in a slum, or places which are very dangerous to go to.
Mm.
And that is one of the when you ask me about what about Khidipur, that is one of the identity I've always wanted to change for, or would have liked to change for Khidipur as a whole. That how we Khidrpurian, I don't know if the word is perceived from a non-Khidrpurian. But then later on growing, uh, um, I have a lot of Bengali friends who've always had the fear of coming to fancy market, which is like
Mhm.
a
This is a
smart.
Muslim ghetto for people who don't know. Kirirpur is a certain part of Calcutta, what Zafar refers to as Calcutta 23, and it's a largely dominated by Muslims from various parts of India or some of them like of Afghan origin or Bangladeshi origin or whatever. And so yeah, it's a sort of, it's very heavily concentrated Muslim, which Zafar, I hear you saying that the rest of Calcutta perceived as being a large slum, even
Mm.
though not all of it may have been slums in that sense,
I
and
don't.
uh, and
Well,
it's perceived
yeah.
as dangerous. And when you're saying that you have Bengali, because Bengalis can also be Muslims, but when I'm assuming that when you're saying you had other Bengali friends who didn't want to come to Fancy Market, which is in Kidirpur, I'm assuming you're referring them to the Hindus or non-Muslims per se.
Thanks for explaining. Yeah, exactly. For viewers to identify what I am thinking as
Hmm.
at that point of time.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that you picked up. But this was at the age of 17, and prior to that, you never really experienced your identity as a Muslim, as an Afghan Muslim, and how it was placed in the whole of Calcutta. You never had any experiences prior to that. Is that so?
Yeah, yeah. Now, if we particularly speak of an Afghan Muslim, I was then marginalized in the community.
Okay.
So
In Khidirpur also.
yeah, in Kidarpur also I was marginalized, if my best friend sees it, by my friends unknowingly.
How so?
Well, they would call me names, like uh, the skin color was something.
These were pejorative. These were negative
Yeah,
labels.
yeah. Name calling was quite a big thing.
Hmm.
It was more to do with a bit of fun, or as they say,
All
or
in jest.
yeah, it's a banter, but it does affect you as a young man. You laugh it off at that point of time, but when you go back home, you kind of question yourself of why me. So yeah, you're the marginalized in marginalized. So I don't know how how bad that is, but it's not something which I should laugh about, but it's something which is there. So and that kind of made me also aware of how I should behave or deal with other people who are feeling a bit insecure about. So my tolerance level of taboo things became much more better. I started to identify if I could feel for identity which is particular. There are different identities. It can be from the color of your skin, the religion, the sex you want to follow, the body, and I'm very cautious of that. I try to be very. I'm again. Everybody makes. I try to be very cautious of if people are going through or struggling through that, and not to point it out.
Okay. Zafar's journey compels us to ask ourselves several questions. How do we deal with stigma and our smallness? In an earlier episode, leadership consultant and coach Snigdha had observed that leaders are those who often convert their trauma and fears into a fire in their bellies that keeps their passion for growth burning. Sometimes that fire also burns them internally into cinders. If people continue to use their hurt, their pain, to fuel their quest for growth and success. Zafar speaks about how much he owned up his minority identity instead of running away from it, and that made him compassionate to other people with vulnerabilities, and that made him more sensitive to people, both in his professional and social spaces. He speaks about following his passion even when he may not have an outcome in sight. His energy is one of faith, faith in his passion, and believing that it will nurture him and help him to grow. Many of us have had similar experiences of being passionate about music, theatre, arts, or sports in our youth, and eventually succumbed to doubts about the pragmatism of such madness. But Zafar seems to retain the passion even 20 years later, when he decides to take on a role of a caregiver to his infant son and confront his social and internal judgments about his masculinity. The ability to engage with uncertainty and be open to the emergent is a trait that I deeply admire in leaders. Perhaps at this time in the context we live in, it's particularly significant. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Until next time, stay well, keep safe.